It's been a privilege for me to work here. I've always thought of it as a calling. It's more than a job. I was in law enforcement, and I was on the other side of this for a while. I was a parole and probation officer, and I worked with probationers who had children who were in the system. And I've been in houses. I've seen things. I've seen horrible things. I know horrible people. So I've been on the other side of it too, and I do want to acknowledge that we do support the work of people trying to protect kids and police officers as well. We just want them to follow the law that respects the rights of families, and that's what we're here to do: is to help families be able to navigate those situations without violating their rights.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program.
Okay, everyone, I'm back here with Jim Nason, president of HSLDA, and we're going to continue our discussion about very interesting, seminal, landmark cases in the homeschool world. Let's move, Jim, to Fourth Amendment type cases, CPS type cases. I mean, HSLDA has been involved in these from the outset. Let's hit three cases that are recent in the last 10 years that are just representative of what goes on all the time. There's a case from 2016 that was fairly significant. Wilson v. Russo in California. It's a pretty interesting fact pattern. Tell us what the facts of that case were. It's pretty intriguing, and then what the outcome was.
Okay, I'm going to just preface before I talk about the case. People sometimes wonder why do we get involved in these CPS Fourth Amendment type cases, and a big reason goes way back historically. In the olden days of homeschooling, when homeschooling was was actually illegal or thought to be illegal or disfavored to such a high degree and not socially acceptable, there weren't that many people homeschooling. I'm going to state something that's going to actually shock you. When you're talking about, was I shocked? You're going to be shocked. You'll be surprised to learn that most homeschoolers homeschool their homeschooled kids in their homes.
That is shocking.
That is shocking.
That is shocking.
And so what we discovered early on, officials who receive an allegation of, any kind of allegation that goes to a child protective investigator, typically in the pre-homeschool era, they would go to the child's school to avoid the parents. And they'd talk to the child at the school, and when the parents wouldn't even know about it, and the school officials would always allow it. But homeschooled parents homeschool their homeschooled kids in their homes. So where do they have to go to talk to those homeschooled kids who are being homeschooled in their homes? They have to go to the home. And where in the world is the single most protected place under the United States Constitution's Fourth Amendment?
Our home.
It's the home. I mean, there's so much case law about, the home is different. It's different than your car. It's different than your office. It's different than your workplace. It's different than the park. It's different than everything else. The home is the single most protected place under the federal Constitution. And so we learned early on that officials who were frustrated because they couldn't go to a child's school would come to the home and act as if the home was just there was no restriction. There was no barrier. If they want to get in the home, they'll get in the home. And if they can't get in the home, they'll threaten to take your kids. And if they can't do that, they'll get a cop, and then they'll bully their way in. And so that's how we got into the Fourth Amendment cases. The Wilson case is a little different than some of our cases, which really involved protecting the home. The Wilson case it arose in California. Vanessa Wilson had a child she had an older child who had just started homeschooling, and she had a younger daughter who had recently been diagnosed with juvenile onset diabetes. And Vanessa came to us by a strange channel. She wasn't a member of HSLDA, And she called, so many of our friends in California homeschool for reasons differently than what you and I might be motivated, primarily religious and opposition to, not wanting our kids to be in the public school, things like that. There are people in California, especially in California, but all over the country, who homeschool from a different ideological perspective. And Vanessa comes from a different ideological perspective. And she called the organizations that were more aligned with her ideological viewpoints. And they said, look, we don't really help people in this situation, but we're friends with this other outfit called HSLDA. And we had worked together on the Great California Homeschool case in 2009. And we have a great relationship working with them. So they referred Vanessa to us. And so she called us and she told us that she'd been referred by these people. And so we took her call. And here's what she said. I have a 4-year-old who's been recently diagnosed with juvenile onset diabetes. I am on welfare. I'm dependent on public housing. And I have a regular, ongoing, long-time relationship with, the child welfare workers in Riverside County. And she thought it was a positive relationship. She valued the services that they provided her. But then she had a bit of a snafu where she thought she had housing in a neighboring county, San Diego County. So she moved to San Diego County. And because she was getting voluntary services, and I air quotes, voluntary services, it was called voluntary services. When she moved to San Diego County, Riverside County was supposed to transfer her, quote, voluntary services to San Diego. And before that could all happen, it didn't work out for her in San Diego, so she moved back to Riverside. So in the logic of the child welfare system, Riverside County considered her to be in violation of her voluntary services.
They sound voluntary. They sound really voluntary.
Yeah. And so they sent a child protective investigator out to the friend's house that she and her children were staying at. And the investigator happened to have either herself or relatives had adult onset type 2 diabetes, which they're both diabetes, but they're completely separate diseases. Juvenile onset and type 2 adult onset, completely different things. And so she thought that she understood diabetes so well that when she got to the house, I mean, she had it all planned out. She was actually prepared to take children into custody, but she demanded that Vanessa show her the child's glucometer. And she read the glucometer and said, oh, this is outrageous, nah. And then she ended up taking both children. So the boy who was being homeschooled had no health issues. The girl, it turns out, her diabetes was being perfectly managed, but it wasn't the way it would look if it was adult onset. So while the CPS investigator was there in the home, she had a sheriff's deputy hold Vanessa, block her over in a corner while she took the 7-year-old boy over to the other side of the room and asked him to read from a book and recite his ABCs. And during that time, I later found out, short story, we sued her. And during discovery at depositions, one of the other, who happened to be an intern at the time, told me something I didn't know. While the deputy was sort of not physically, but standing in the way of Vanessa over in the corner, and she was, the investigator was talking with her 7-year-old son over on the other side of the room, Vanessa actually collapsed to the floor. It was, she just was distraught and she collapsed to the floor right when the investigator was asking the boy to read. And so he didn't read to her satisfaction at that moment. So she took him into custody too, and which was, completely unbowed. So when she called, she was desperate. We thought we could help. It was the day it happened or the next day. And we,
So at the time she called, her 2 kids have been removed.
they were removed.
I mean, they're out of the home.
They're out of the home, right? And so she'd called these friends of ours, from the other homeschool organization out in California, and they referred to us the next day. How do I get my kids back? And we thought we could do it fast under these circumstances. I mean, we talked to her, we believed her, we got, so the daughter had been in the treatment of a 30-year veteran pediatric hormone doctor, endocrinologist. Anyway, and she swore that he would say that she was handling it right, and that the glucometer readings are spot checks, and the important reading is the A1C, which is over time, and over time the A1C was coming under control, and Vanessa knew how to monitor and how to diet and the administration of insulin and all of those things. And so we got a hold of the guy, and he said, yeah, that's right. So they have a 3-day hearing usually, or a pretty short order hearing to decide whether the custody should continue. We had the guy standing by to testify in the hopes that, we could get our child back right away. And the judge in the juvenile court said, well, look, this is not the hearing for me to take evidence. The only thing I do here at this hearing is review the petition that's been submitted by the CPS investigator and assume that all of the facts in it are true. And if that would justify continued detention, then I should rule in favor of them. And that's right, actually. I mean, he's not wrong, but what we tried to prevail upon him was we've got, this super experienced doctor who in 5 minutes can dispel you of the notion and has read this report and will tell you that she's completely off base. And he wouldn't do it. So it took us 50 days, and we had to get get an affidavit from this doctor. Then we had to submit it into the juvenile court under seal, and it was the whole mishmash of this vast and almost kind of mindless bureaucracy before the next hearing. It took 50 days. And then when he read the affidavit, he was like, oh, well, haha, of course.
The affidavit you presented to him.
That said where the doctor basically put in his affidavit what he would have said, 5 minutes into the whole thing.
Did the mom know where her kids were for these 50 days, or did she have contact?
Yeah. So she had, like I said, she had a long history of positive involvement with the system. And so she knew they had visits, and they had, she met the foster parents, and they actually had a relationship. So yes.
So providentially about as good as it can be for her.
It was okay.
Relationship.
I mean,
with
it was
her
not
kids during the process.
Yeah. It wasn't all bad. And she, to go back to the word you used, she was very gracious. I mean, Vanessa was very gracious about the people who were caring for her kids as well. So what we learned was that not only did they not have any authority, there was no legal authority in California to take the boy, even if he couldn't read. There is no such thing as educational neglect in California. There is no statutory authority for what they did with the boy. And through discovery and reviewing all of their documents and all the notes that they made, I learned when I got the discovery that they knew also in very short order from the doctors, from the notes that they had talked to the doctors in the hospital. But not only that, a child with diabetes is considered fragile for placement in foster care. So they're medically fragile. And that's a term of art. That means before you can place this child in foster care, you have to have a foster parent who knows how to manage diabetes. And because it's, it requires regular maintenance. So the notes reflected that their own medical person so the child couldn't be discharged from the hospital until they found a foster home that could take her. And the CPS, their own medical person had evaluated the child and determined that she was fit to leave the hospital almost immediately. I mean, she was never in any kind of medical risk, in other words. But in the notes, it says, but she's medically fragile, meaning she can only go to a certain kind of foster home. So when they went to court on day 3, right after they seized the child, they kept telling the judge, oh, we can't, this kid is still in the hospital and we can't release her because she's so medically fragile. And they kept emphasizing this idea of medically fragile to bolster the notion that was false, that Vanessa wasn't caring for her properly. But they knew, within 24 hours that wasn't true. So this was kind of a case that I worked on pretty intensely, and I did all of the discovery and the depositions. And after we finished all of that, then we went to mediation. And at the mediation, it was a retired Superior Court judge, and we actually videotape our depositions. And so I videotaped when I walked through the records with both the investigator and her supervisor, and put those in. For mediation, you prepare a memo, and it's just given to the mediator. The other side doesn't get it. So I prepared a regular memo, but then I also prepared a video memo where you can actually see this happening, where, and when they see the air, they realize that, oops, during the deposition, it's visible on the tape. It's very compelling when you see that happen. And we arrived at 9:00 in the morning, and the judge said, well, I don't know, my job is to make sure that both sides are disappointed when they leave here. And, I just don't get your hopes up. Then mediation was over at 9:00, and Vanessa got $700,000. So that was a pretty satisfying case. And it wasn't just because Vanessa got a lot of money. That's how you win civil litigation is, you sue for damages and you get money. And in this case, we didn't go to trial. We got a settlement. But that amount of money, in a lot of civil litigation, you don't get money unless you sign a non-disclosure and you can't talk about it. But in California, public agencies can't do that. The amount of money has got to be public. And, so that amount of money for that kind of case, 2 things happened. The investigator, even by the time I took her deposition, was no longer working with children. They took her out of that role. And the amount of money it has an in terrorem effect. It communicates. Everybody in the system in California knows about that case. So it puts everybody on notice. What I said before, the law applies to them as well as it applies to us. So before they go removing children, they got to know what they're doing, and it has to be justified.
Well, it's interesting, and yet to this day, CPS social workers still tell families, I'll take your kids if you don't let me talk to them. I'll take your kids if you don't let me in the door. I mean, we still deal with these threats and allegations even today, despite this. I mean, so we've got the law on our side, but unfortunately, we still are working with human beings that overexert what they think they're allowed to do.
Yep.
Let's fast forward to a couple of cases that are a little more recent, 2019 and 2020, that are in the CPS kind of Fourth Amendment realm. The Curry case, I had actually heard about before I even came to HSLDA. It was fairly well known. And frankly, it's real egregious. Yeah. And the rights violations are almost shocking to any homeschool family today. Give us a little bit about that case and what went on there, and why we jumped in.
So Josiah and Holly Curry had 6 kids. Josiah was out of town. Holly was taking her older child to karate practice. She had all 6 of her kids in her almost brand new, totally safe, I think it was kind of an SUV, and decided on the way to karate practice she stopped at a little market that was to buy muffins for the kids because the other kids needed a snack. So she runs into the market, buys the snacks, and comes out. Not in the store, and the vehicle is outside in her sight pretty much the whole time, for 5 minutes. In the meantime, while she's in the store, a passerby is shocked that there's children left alone in a vehicle. And it turns out that this little market was right across the street from the police station. So the passerby gets the police come over. When Holly comes out, the police are waiting for her. And she says, well, but they're perfectly safe. I was just in the store for a couple of minutes. The car's brand new. It's got all these safety features. There's nothing anybody can do. They're all buckled in, And the policeman says, yes, it's not illegal to leave a child in the car in this case. And you did it perfectly safely. They were never in any danger. But under these circumstances, I have to make a report to Child Protective Services, which then led to the rest of the story. The next day, a CPS investigator came to her house and said, I've got this report that yesterday, this happened. And so today I need to come into your house, interview all of your children privately, separate from you. And I need to tour your house to see all the children's sleeping arrangements and look in the fridge to make sure you have food and all that. So Holly said, I don't think so. Where's your warrant? And the kids are perfectly safe now, whatever. I mean, they weren't in danger yesterday and they're not in danger now. And yesterday has nothing to do with today. So you don't need to come into my house. And Holly is a very, respectful and polite and soft-spoken woman who knows her rights. But, so she was very respectful in talking to the worker. And the worker said, well, if you don't let me in, I'm going to have to go get a policeman. And so Holly, who has high respect for the police generally, and I think she had relatives that are policemen, said, fine. If a policeman comes, he'll know my rights. That was her thinking. So she came back with a policeman. The investigator came back with a policeman. And together they continued to say, you must let us in. And eventually said, if you don't let us in, we're going to leave right now and go get an emergency custody order and come back and take all your kids. And the policeman participated in that. So it kind of shattered, in many respects, her confidence in the police because she expected that the police would understand the Fourth Amendment, that it protects the home above all other things. So they came back, or they made the threat so real to her, and they were fairly aggressive verbally, and that she felt like if she didn't let them in, they would in fact go away and come back with an order to take her kids into custody. So she let them in. And the shocking part, that's shocking enough in my view, but then the shocking part is the CPS investigator strip searched her kids. And for the purpose of what she called, even throughout the litigation and discovery, they refused to say that it was a strip search. They called it a body check. And the body check idea is that, well, when you got a hold of a kid, when you got a kid right there, even if the allegations don't have anything to do with, physical abuse, check them out anyway and do a body check. And it's not a strip search. It's just a body check. It's no big deal. That was kind of their attitude about it. So she strip searched all 6 kids and concluded that there was no sign of abuse. They had a nice home. Everything was fine. And that there was nothing really to be done. But when she left, she said, well, I'm just going to classify this, that you had an oopsie daisy. You shouldn't probably leave your kids in the car. It was just an oopsie daisy. But if I ever have to come back here again, and she kind of left this unspoken threat dangling. So, the Currys called us, and after, a little bit, we with them decided to file a lawsuit. And our colleague Peter Kamakavivole handled this lawsuit pretty much from start to finish. And after discovery, again, we had a settlement conference. And in this case, the combined settlement from both the CPS investigator and the sheriff's deputy was over $500,000 for the Curry family.
I mean, this is a fact pattern that scares moms.
Yeah.
I mean, this idea that if I don't do what they're saying, if I don't capitulate to their demands, something worse is going to happen. I mean,
Right.
I get these calls, and we all get these calls, I mean, every week where they say, what should I do? Should I do what they're asking? Should I not do what they're asking? And every mom and dad resonates with never wanting to be put in that position.
Right.
I mean, it's just, you can't fathom that you would stop to get muffins and the next day your kids would be strip searched.
Right.
And so it's shocking that this still goes on and these demands are still made. I mean, we get these calls on call after hours on the weekends and the evenings about, do I have to do what they're saying?
Yeah.
I mean, the comments are, I mean, I'm sure you hear these regularly too, that they still make these comments. Well, they're telling me that if they're not allowed to come in, they're going to go get an emergency warrant and I'm going to lose my children. And they say, is that true? And the reality is neither you nor I know what will happen.
Right.
We have no idea in the Curry case whether they would have gotten the warrant or whether they would have tried or whether the judge would have granted it or whether he would not have granted it. I mean, these are challenging situations for moms. So
Right.
what was it like for the Curry family to walk through this process to the extent you were involved with them and just their resolve? And what would you say to families who experience this type of invasiveness and maybe to encourage them? Because when families like the Currys stand up, homeschooling families across America, I think win because we have good law, good precedent that now applies to them. So what would you say to those families that deal with these coming up?
Well, there's a couple of things. The good precedent. So this case not only resulted in a sizable settlement, which sends shockwaves through the administrative agencies that they have to change the way they do things. But the federal district judge before the settlement conference wrote a really decisive opinion in favor of our case. So the defendants in that case had moved to dismiss the case, and we resisted that motion, and the judge wrote a very strong case. It wasn't over, but based on the facts that were in the discovery record, he weighed in very strongly on our Fourth Amendment arguments side. And that's a published opinion that anybody can cite now. So that made a big difference. The other thing I would say is that one of the benefits of the work we do, because we care about this so much, we have a hotline 24/7, 365 that homeschool families can call us and help, and we can help them navigate these situations. And Holly on that day didn't call us. I'm not saying that to fault her. She was kind of overcome by events, and she had no one to help her. But oftentimes, if we can get involved, we can help them navigate the situation in a way that avoids these unhappy consequences. And we've all done it. We've all taken these calls. And I would say that we can have a real positive influence on how, events are going to transpire. And as you said, we don't know. All we can do is advise our families, about their rights and about the way things are likely to go. And we occasionally will intercede, actually talk to the officials. And, my goal when I get a call like that is to de-escalate the situation, help the family be as forthcoming as they're comfortable, not let it get out of hand, and hopefully kind of bring it into a better conclusion. Knowing your rights is one thing. You should know what your rights are. You should always be aware that, I think you've hit this before, and I'm going to say it again. It doesn't really help. We've all probably helped people who kind of get in the face of the officials, or swear at them, or say nasty things, and that's not good. That's not a good idea. It's not helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it ultimately the family doesn't benefit when that happens.
No, it doesn't.
So.
You won't achieve the outcome you want that way. That's not the best way to achieve the outcome. It's probably not a good thing anyway, but And over time, I will say that I have had a lot more success over time, and I think it has to do with, collecting these precedents that more and more. I mean, I've actually done trainings where I was invited a couple of times to train people in the system on our perspective of the Fourth Amendment. So it's not, these cases, this work, ongoing, and not just us, others as well, has had a positive effect, so that it is actually less of a risk for homeschooling families today than it was back in the day. And we go back, one of our very first cases in this area was on behalf of the Calabretta family, and they were actually reported for having their kids at home during school hours back in the day. That was it, pretty much. And it was one of our first successful challenges to that sort of thing back in the 90s. And in the Curry case in Kentucky, we used that Calabretta case from California to help persuade the judge in Kentucky that these guys here in Kentucky should have known what the law is, because this Calabretta case, published by an appellate court in California, has been on the books for 20 years, So there's no excuse for them to not know what the law is.
And we can, as we defend these cases and have victories in these cases, we can tell the officials what's going on. I mean,
right.
We can inform them, say, hey, are you aware of a case from a couple of years ago where, the rights were violated and this was the result? So we can use that to kind of hold them in check, if you will, and defend the rights of the families. So Jim, let's talk about an interesting case out of Texas from a few years ago, involving a napping child, a small nursery, and a family really just trying to live their life and do the best they can with the situation they're in and homeschooling their family. And so tell us about this case. You know about it from Texas. What happened there? What transpired? And what did HSLDA do to help?
Yeah. So this was actually a little bit of a different kind of case along the same lines as these other Fourth Amendment cases. But the difference was we were able to intercede in court before the bad thing happened. And here's how that happened. Somebody reported Mrs. Berryman to a CPS investigator. And the allegation went something like this. They put the baby on the floor in a closet, and she cries for a long time before going to sleep. How's it? Pretty much it. And the CPS people came out to the Berryman's house and said, okay, we've got an investigation we got to do. You have to let us into your house, and we want to look at your, where the baby sleeps and your other children sleep. We got to look and see if you got food in the fridge. And Mrs. Berryman actually came to the door holding the baby at issue, wearing only a diaper. And so the CPS investigator could say, and I saw the child appeared fit and healthy, and no signs of physical abuse. So Mrs. Berryman said, no thanks. And the CPS investigator did something. So I said in earlier episodes, or at some point, that part of our job as HSLDA attorneys is to help our families understand what their legal rights are, but also to make the officials follow the law themselves. So in this case, the CPS investigator actually did what we want them to do. She took her allegations, she wrote them down in a petition, and submitted it to a juvenile court. The failure in this case wasn't the CPS investigator. The failure in this case was the judge. The judge read the affidavit and rubber stamped it and said, you now have the authority to enter the home and do all these things you want to do. And so, but because of the processes they follow in Texas, the sheriff actually served the family with the order. and the investigator wasn't there. So the family got the order and were able to call us and say, hey, I got this order. We read the affidavit and we said, so the Constitution requires, the Fourth Amendment says, if you're going to take allegations to a judge, the judge has to evaluate those and determine that there's probable cause to believe a bad thing will be discovered inside. And I mean, the CPS investigator did an actual brilliant job. In her affidavit, she said, we got this allegation about this baby crying incessantly in a closet. I talked to the mom. I saw the baby. The baby was healthy. And the mom said, well, yes, we have a walk-in closet off of our bedroom that we've converted into a nursery for the baby. And, we're training the baby to be able to put herself to sleep. And so when we put her down, she does cry sometimes. I mean, I know we've talked about shocking things before, but a baby crying when you put them down for a nap is, that's pretty shocking. So but that was all in the affidavit. So there were no allegations of anything bad, and there was a perfectly legitimate explanation. And the judge nevertheless granted the order. Which
goes back to what you said earlier. We can't guarantee what the judge will do.
Nope.
I mean, just because they exercise their rights, and no reasonable person or homeschool family would ever think the judge would sign off. Sometimes they do.
Yeah.
And so we got to keep fighting.
Yep.
All right. So the judge signs off on this order.
And because the sheriff delivered it and the CPS investigator wasn't there, we reached out to the attorney in charge of this whole outfit. And we said, look, we're going to file a writ at the Court of Appeals. This is no good. What are you going to do, in the meantime? And the attorney said, well, if we try to serve or, try to execute on this and you don't comply, then we'll have a procedure to hold the parents in contempt. They didn't shoot, no threats to, bring to enter the home without authority. So that gave us time. I mean, I think we found out about this on a Thursday, and this was during COVID, and I was at my house, and Peter was at his house, and we didn't, so 50 states, every state does it different. And in Texas, they have courts of appeals that actually have sort of regional jurisdiction. So in this case, it was the Court of Appeals in Tyler, Texas, that we had to file our writ. And we have people that we've worked with all over the country, lawyers that we've worked with all over the country, and so we get this situation. We've never had one quite like this before, in at least in the 20 plus years that I've been here. But this is wrong, and we had to figure out what do we do? What do we do? So I called up a buddy of mine who's a Texas lawyer, and he said, "Well, you might think about this." And so we looked it up, and by Friday, Peter had figured it all out. And by Monday, we'd filed this writ with our local counsel in Texas, in Tyler, Texas, and the Court of Appeals. So in addition to the writ, we said, not only should you tell the judge not to do it, so it was actually a writ of mandamus, which is you actually sue the judge and you ask the Court of Appeals to basically spank the judge.
So explain what a writ is. See, the district judge made an order.
Yeah.
You're going, but the case is still ongoing. So
right.
The purpose of the writ is to do what while it's ongoing at the trial level?
So typically, when a trial court level issues a judgment, you would appeal. But this was an unappealable order. You can't appeal this kind of order. So in Texas, the writ procedure exists when no other remedy is available and the judicial officer has overstepped his bounds. And so you ask the appellate court to tell the judge that mandamus means to mandate. So please, Mr. Appellate Court, tell Mr. District Court Judge to back off. And in addition to that, we ask the appellate court, to issue a stay so that the order that the lower court judge had signed could not, in fact, be executed and would not lead to any kind of contempt proceedings. So immediately, within hours of our filing it, the Court of Appeals ordered the county to respond, like within 24 hours or 48 hours, I sort of forget, but fast, respond fast. And almost immediately upon receipt of the response, they issued the stay. And so now the order's completely, can't be enforced. And then a few weeks later, they issued a final opinion telling and courts, they like to be polite to each other. And so the appellate court said to the lower court, you have, you have so much time to either respond yourself or vacate the order. And if you don't, then we'll issue the mandate. So they didn't actually issue the mandate. They gave the judge time, and the judge withdrew his order himself. So this one was the same principle. The home is the most protected place under the Fourth Amendment. But because of the procedure that they followed, we were able to intervene. And because, we know the Fourth Amendment law cold, and we have such a big network of people to help us with local procedures, we were able to act over a weekend, file first thing and get quick, expert judicial relief. Really kind of an amazing thing when you think about it.
Yeah, it's very amazing. And it does highlight also just the need, the timing of these is significant. When something happens to a family, the quicker they can reach out to us, get us the documents, get us the orders, get us whatever's going on, the quicker we can then respond, engage local counsel, file writs if needed, whatever's necessary. So the family is benefits from reaching out early,
right,
and quickly,
right,
so we can engage early,
right,
as quickly as possible. So hopefully, it's a little bit sad when a family waits a little bit and we're playing kind of catch up, with an order that's already been given or already been executed, when perhaps had we known about it sooner, we might have been able to starve it off a little bit longer. So
we started off one of these conversations with, every day or frequently these kinds of things that we'd never expect would come in. And, as a lawyer, actually, so this is just such fulfilling work for me, and I know it is for you too, on so many levels, because we're actually helping a real life family out there whose life would be turned upside down. So we help the Berrymans to prevent what happened to the Currys. But that doesn't happen without years and years and years of laboring in that vineyard and actually understanding the law. And then as a professional matter, just as a lawyer, this is just a lot of fun. I don't want to, say it's fun for me to help people who are in distress. That's not the fun part, but the law part, the law itself is interesting and fun to work with, and these weird fact patterns. Who would have ever thought? I have 7 kids. You're up to 8, right?
I am.
Yeah. I've had babies cry, and I would never have. I've had, one of our early cases was the Stumbo case, where a 2-year-old wandered out the front door momentarily and was seen by a passerby, and it started a whole thing. I've had 2-year-olds wander out my front door. I've had kids fall off bikes and break their arms, and hospital nurses look at me with suspicion. I've had
or you've looked at your kids and you see a bruise on their leg,
and you
go, where did that come from?
Yeah.
As the parent, you don't know. Every parent can resonate with these stories.
My youngest child, this is just my youngest child, when she was like just 2 or 3 years old. We live in the country, and we have a hill out the backyard, and it snowed. And we have this trail that you can slide down in the snow. And all my kids were sliding, and, it's just, everybody's fun. And the 3-year-old wants to finally go down. Abby, she's 3, and she wants to go down the hill by herself. So we put her in one of those plastic slider things, and it's got there's a trail, it's like, it's got guardrails. It's been gone down so many times. It's like, and somehow she jumped the trail and she just makes a bead for the one tree, and smacks her face and has a big old mouse on the side of her eye. And for weeks, we're out in pub. This is a true story. I was out at the grocery store with my wife and Abby, and I'm holding Abby in my arms, and we're at the checkout. In the next lane over, there's a sheriff's deputy, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and I had a wave, and he kind of waves, and I'm like, what's going to happen here? And she's got this big 3-day bruise on her face. Oh, my heavens. So, yes, that's the other thing about homeschool legal defense that people should know. We're all parents, and we're, not all, but we homeschool. Most of our lawyers either have homeschooled their kids, or some of them were homeschooled themselves and homeschool their kids. And so we're, professionally trained to help people in these situations, but we're those people too. We've had the same kind of life experiences that we want to help people prevent.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll get a call on a weekend or an evening, and the family will say, I hate to bother you. And from my perspective, it's never a bother. I mean, because I'm that family, where I've where that could be me, a kid that rode their bike and has this massive scrape on the side of their head, and so for us, and I know I could speak for all the attorneys in our department to say it's not a bother to reach out to us. If you need help, you need help, and we're happy to answer the phone. We're happy to give it. So please don't hesitate to call because you think that we're going to be inconvenienced. So we'd rather you call and us be able to help than find out that it's a little bit too late.
I mean, I appreciate that, and I couldn't agree more. Over the years, I've had calls sometimes in the middle of the night, and get waked up, and my wife will say, "Was that a real emergency?" I said, "It was to them."
Yep. Yeah, and it is very rewarding to talk to families. It's very rewarding. I had a similar experience where there was a knock at the front door when my kids looked out the window and said, "Dad, there's a police officer at the door." And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I got lots of kids at home. The home is very noisy. It's loud almost all the time. I'm thinking, here we come. Here's some neighbor. We're new to the neighborhood. They don't know us. And turns out he had the wrong address. So I felt okay. But kind of that momentary fear of like, oh my goodness, this is a police officer. What happens next? And, I work here. And I had that momentary sensation of, how's this going to unfold? So I can resonate with a parent that says, hey, I got CPS at my door. I got a sheriff at my door, and I'm terrified. It's a terrifying feeling. And it's a privilege to help families walk through that road and just help them navigate, think objectively through what should I do? What should I not do? And it's really a privilege to work here for that reason.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. I couldn't agree with you more. It's been a privilege for me to work here. I've always thought of it as a calling. It's more than a job. I quit. I was in law enforcement, and I had dealings. I mean, I was on the other side of this for a while. I was a parole and probation officer, and I worked with probationers who had children who were in the system. And, I've been in houses, I've seen things. I've seen horrible things. I know horrible people. So I've been on the other side of it too. And I do want to, acknowledge that we do support the work of people trying to protect kids and police officers as well. We just want them to follow the law that, respects the rights of families. And that's what we're here to do, is to help families be able to navigate those situations without violating their rights.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with your family and friends. You can sign up for Homeschool Talks. Go to homeschooltalks.com/join. You can get access to show notes. You can submit questions to Jim. You can suggest topics for us to discuss. And if you'd like to donate to the work of HSLDA, go to homeschooltalks.com/join and homeschooltalks.com/donate. And if you're not a member and you'd like to be a member, please consider joining. As we talked about, a lot of the benefits we discussed on this episode regarding calling HSLDA, having access to attorneys after hours, those are member benefits that you get if you join us and partner with us in Homeschool Freedom. Thank you for listening.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's legal support team. We know homeschooling isn't always easy. That's why we're committed to giving you peace of mind, so you can focus on giving your kids the best possible education. As an HSLDA member, you have access to customized legal advice from our team of attorneys to help you comply with your state's homeschool law. And will represent you if your right to homeschool is ever challenged, even in court. Every day, we help our members respond to overreaching officials, and we stand ready to defend your homeschool against unlawful attacks. To hear more about how you can enjoy a worry-free homeschool experience, visit hslda.org/join. That's hslda.org/join. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.